The snow fell in soft, relentless sheets blanketing Willow Creek, Vermont, in a silence so profound it seemed to hush the world itself. The small town, nestled in a valley hemmed by dense pine forests and rolling hills, was no stranger to brutal winters. Its 2,500 residents prided themselves on their resilience, their ability to endure months of biting cold and isolation. Maple syrup farms dotted the outskirts, their sugar shacks dormant under the weight of the season, while the town's Main Street, a modest stretch of brick storefronts and a single blinking stoplight, lay quiet, as if holding its breath. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your sorrows, and the brand of coffee you drank at the Willow Creek diner. But beneath that familiarity, secrets lingered, buried like roots under the frozen ground. Daniel Harper sat at his dining room table, a worn oak slab that had seen better days, surrounded by a fortress of papers. Case files, police reports, witness statements. Each document, a fragment of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve for 7 years. The dim light of a single lamp cast long shadows across the room, illuminating the creases in his forehead and the gray streaks that had crept into his dark hair. At 42, Daniel looked older than his years, his hazel eyes carrying the weight of countless sleepless nights. He was a high school history teacher, known for his quiet intensity and knack for making the past feel alive to his students. But it was his own past that consumed him now, a single moment frozen in time. The day his daughter, Lily, vanished. Outside, the snow continued its descent, piling against the windows of the Harpers' modest 2-story home. The house, with its peeling white paint and sagging front porch, stood at the edge of Willow Creek, where the town gave way to a thicket of pines. The backyard stretched toward those woods, a familiar playground for generations of local children. 7 years ago, Lily, then 6, had begged to go outside during a snowstorm, her small hands tugging at Daniel's sleeve, her green eyes bright with excitement. "Just for a little bit, Daddy," she'd said, her voice muffled by the scarf Emily had wrapped around her face. Daniel had relented, as he often did, promising to check on her in 15 minutes. When he stepped outside, the yard was empty, her footprints swallowed by the falling snow. The search that followed had been relentless. Police, volunteers, and even strangers from neighboring towns had combed the woods, the frozen Willow River, and every attic and barn in Willow Creek. Divers plunged into the icy water. Dogs sniffed through the snow. The town had rallied, their grief a collective weight, but no trace of Lily was found. The case grew cold, the headlines faded, and Willow Creek resumed its quiet rhythm. But for Daniel and Emily, time stopped that day, their lives suspended in a purgatory of hope and despair. Daniel's fingers traced the edge of a yellowed police report, its corners curling from years of handling. The words blurred together, witness statements, timelines, dead-end leads. A tip from a hiker who'd seen a girl matching Lily's description in a town 50 miles away. A grainy security camera image from a gas station that turned out to be someone else's child. Each scrap of hope had unraveled, leaving Daniel to sift through the wreckage. He glanced at the window, where the snow seemed to dance in the glow of the streetlights, and felt the familiar ache in his chest. Somewhere out there, Lily might still be alive. He had to believe that. The sound of footsteps broke his reverie. Emily appeared in the doorway, her auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, a dish towel slung over her shoulder. At 40, she was still striking, her freckled face softened by a warmth that had always drawn people to her. As the town librarian, she spent her days surrounded by books and the quiet chatter of patrons, but it was her community work, organizing book drives, reading to children, that kept her tethered to the world. Yet even she couldn't escape the shadow of Lily's absence. Her smile, once a constant, now appeared only in fleeting moments, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Still at it?" Emily asked, her voice gentle but tinged with exhaustion. She crossed the room, setting a mug of coffee beside him. The steam curled upward, carrying the scent of hazelnut, his favorite. Daniel nodded, not looking up. "Detective Larson called yesterday. Said they got a new tip. Someone thought they saw a girl like Lily at a bus station in Burlington. They're checking it out." Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't need to ask what the odds were. They'd been through this dance too many times, hope kindled, then extinguished. "Anything solid?" she asked, leaning against the table. "Not yet." Daniel's voice was flat, but his fingers tightened around the report. "They're pulling footage, talking to witnesses. You know how it goes." She nodded, her gaze drifting to the window. "It's snowing hard out there. Reminds me of—" She trailed off, and Daniel knew she was thinking of that day. They rarely spoke of it directly, as if naming the memory might summon the pain anew. Instead, Emily straightened, forcing a small smile. "I was thinking we should have someone over for dinner. It's been too long since we've done anything. Normal." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Dinner? Now?" He gestured at the papers. I need to go through these before Larson calls back." "I know," she said softly. "But we've been so closed off, Daniel. Just the two of us, stuck, in this house, waiting for something that might not—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I just think it would be good for us. For both of us." He wanted to argue, to say that every moment not spent searching was a betrayal of Lily. But the weariness in Emily's eyes stopped him. She'd carried this loss as heavily as he had, and her quiet strength had kept them from falling apart, entirely. "Who'd you have in mind?" he asked, relenting. "Thomas Reed," she said, her voice brightening slightly. "He's been so alone since his family died. I saw him at the library last week checking out books on woodworking. He barely said a word, but he looked lonely." Thomas Reed was their neighbor across the street, a widower in his late 50s, who'd lived in Willow Creek for decades. A former mechanic, he'd once been a fixture at town events, always tinkering with someone's car or helping with a community project. But 10 years ago, a drunk driver had taken his wife and teenage son on Route 7, leaving Thomas a shell of himself. He'd retreated into his small, weathered house, emerging only for groceries or the occasional trip to the hardware store. Daniel couldn't recall the last time they'd spoken more than a passing hello. "He's not exactly the social type," Daniel said, rubbing the back of his neck. "You sure he'd even come?" "I think he might," Emily replied. "He fixed that loose step on our porch last summer without us asking. Maybe he's ready to connect again. And honestly, Daniel, we could use a friend too." Before Daniel could respond, the doorbell chimed, a sharp note that cut through the quiet. He glanced at Emily, who shrugged, clearly not expecting anyone. Wiping his hands on his jeans, Daniel crossed the living room and opened the front door. A gust of cold air swept in, carrying a swirl of snowflakes. Thomas Reed stood on the porch, his tall frame hunched against the wind. His gray hair was dusted with snow, and his weathered face carried its usual serious expression. He wore a heavy flannel jacket, his hands shoved deep into the pockets. "Morning, Daniel," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Sorry to bother you so early." "No bother," Daniel replied, stepping aside to let him in from the cold. "What's up?" Thomas hesitated, shifting his weight. "That storm last night knocked a branch from your oak tree into my yard. It's leaning against my shed. I went ahead and moved it, but I figured I'd let you know." Daniel frowned, embarrassed. "I'm sorry about that, Thomas. That tree's been dropping branches for years. I'll come take a look and clear anything else that's fallen." "No need," Thomas said quickly, waving a hand. "I handled it. Was working on something out back anyway, so it wasn't any trouble." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Working in this weather? That's dedication. What's the project?" Thomas's eyes flickered just for a moment before he answered. "Just a storage shed, nothing fancy. Been meaning to organize some tools." He shrugged, but there was a tightness in his posture that Daniel couldn't quite place. "Well, thanks for dealing with the branch," Daniel said, sensing Thomas was eager to leave. "We owe you one. No problem." Thomas nodded and turned to go, his boots crunching in the snow as he descended the porch steps. As Daniel closed the door, Emily appeared behind him, dish towel still in hand. "Was that Thomas?" "Yeah," Daniel said, glancing out the window as Thomas disappeared into the swirling snow. "A branch from our tree fell into his yard. He already took care of it." Emily's face softened. "See? He's thoughtful. We should invite him for dinner tonight. It's a good opportunity. Daniel hesitated, his gaze drifting back to the dining table, where the case files waited. The thought of socializing felt like a distraction, a luxury he couldn't afford. But Emily's hopeful expression tugged at him. "All right," he said finally. "I'll ask him. But don't be surprised if he says no." Her smile was small but genuine, a rare spark of light in their shadowed home. "Thank you, Daniel." He zipped up his jacket and stepped outside, the cold biting at his face. The snow crunched under his boots as he crossed the street to Thomas's house, a squat, two-story structure with faded blue siding and a sagging roof. The front yard was buried under fresh snow, untouched except for Thomas's footprints leading to the door. Daniel knocked firmly and waited, his breath forming clouds in the air. After a moment with no response, he knocked again, louder this time. A faint sound came from the backyard, a rhythmic tapping, like metal on wood. Curious, Daniel followed the noise, rounding the corner of the house. The backyard was a small, fenced-in space, bordered by a thick line of pines. At the far end stood an old shed, its wooden walls weathered but sturdy. Thomas was there, crouched near the shed, hammering something into place. He looked up as Daniel approached, his expression startled. "Daniel," Thomas said, standing, quickly and brushing snow from his knees. "Didn't hear you knock. Sorry." "No problem," Daniel replied, noticing how Thomas positioned himself in front of the shed, as if shielding it. "I just came by to thank you again for the branch, and, Emily and I were wondering if you'd like to come over for dinner tonight. Around 6? Thomas's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. "Dinner?" he repeated as if the concept were foreign. "That's kind of you. I've got some work to finish here, but I'll try to make it." "Great," Daniel said, glancing at the shed. "That the storage project you mentioned? Looks like a solid setup." "Yeah," Thomas said quickly, his voice a touch too sharp. "Just organizing some old tools, like I said. Nothing special." Daniel nodded, but the tapping sound he'd heard lingered in his mind. It hadn't sounded like casual organization, more like deliberate construction. "Well, we'll see you at 6 then. Let me know if you need a hand with that shed." "I'm good," Thomas said, his tone final. "Thanks, though." As Daniel walked back across the street, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Thomas had always been private, especially since his family's death, but his evasiveness felt different today, calculated almost. The shed, the hurried dismissal, the way he'd stood in front of it like a guard. Daniel pushed the thought aside, chalking it up to his own exhaustion. Grief had a way of making everything seem suspicious. Back inside, Emily was in the kitchen, pulling ingredients from the pantry. "He said yes?" she asked, her voice hopeful. "He said he'll try to make it," Daniel replied, hanging his jacket by the door. "He's working on some shed out back. Seemed kind of cagey about it." Emily paused, a can of tomatoes in her hand. "Cagey how?" "Just off. Didn't want to talk about it. Kept it vague." Daniel shrugged, returning to the dining table. "Probably nothing." Emily set the can down and crossed her arms. "He's been alone for a long time, Daniel. Losing his wife and son like that, it changes a person. Maybe he's just not used to people asking questions." "Maybe," Daniel conceded, but the unease lingered. He picked up a police report, trying to focus, but his mind kept drifting to Thomas's backyard, to the shed, and the strange tapping sound. The morning passed in a blur of snow and paperwork. Emily bustled about the house, cleaning and preparing for dinner, her movements a quiet rebellion against the stagnation that had settled over their lives. Daniel, meanwhile, sifted through the case files, his eyes scanning familiar words for something, anything he might have missed. A witness statement from a neighbor who'd seen a strange car on their street the day Lily disappeared. A report of a child's mitten found near the river, later confirmed not to be hers. Each page was a reminder of how little they'd found, how vast the unknown remained. By noon, Emily called him to the kitchen. "I need to get groceries for tonight," she said, scribbling a list. We're out of almost everything, and I want to make something nice. Pot roast, maybe, with that. Apple cobbler you like. Daniel glanced at the papers, reluctant to leave them. Can you handle it? I want to finish these before Larson calls. Emily's expression softened, but there was a flicker of frustration in her eyes. Daniel, I don't drive well in this snow, and the store's too far to walk. Could you go? It won't take long, and you'll be back before Thomas is ready for dinner. He sighed, knowing she was right. The roads were treacherous, and Emily had never been confident behind the wheel in winter. All right, he said, standing. Write me the list. Her smile was grateful, and she handed him a neatly written list of ingredients. Thank you, she said, squeezing his hand. It means a lot. Daniel shoveled a path to the driveway, the cold air stinging his lungs. He started the car, letting it warm up as he scraped ice from the windshield. As he pulled out, he noticed Thomas crossing the street, heading toward his own truck. Hey, Thomas, Daniel called, rolling down his window. All set with the shed? Thomas froze, then shook his head. Actually, I just remembered I've got an errand to run. Might have to skip that trip we talked about, but I'll be there for dinner. Daniel frowned. Trip? I didn't... He stopped, realizing Thomas must have misspoken. No problem. We'll see you at 6. Thomas nodded and climbed into his truck, pulling out of the driveway. Daniel watched him go, the unease returning. Thomas hadn't mentioned any trip, and his sudden change of plans felt odd, especially after his earlier caginess. Shaking it off, Daniel drove toward the grocery store, the snow falling heavier now, the wipers struggling to keep up. The Willow Creek market was nearly empty, the storm keeping most shoppers at home. Daniel moved through the aisles, checking off Emily's list: potatoes, carrots, beef, apples for the cobbler. He added a bottle of red wine, knowing Emily would appreciate the gesture. As he loaded the groceries into the car, he glanced at the sky, where heavy gray clouds promised more snow. The forecast had warned of a bigger storm rolling in by evening. On his way home, Daniel took the main road through town, passing the hardware store. A familiar blue truck caught his eye. Thomas's. Daniel slowed, peering through the snow. Thomas was alone, loading bags of cement and lumber into the bed of his truck. Daniel's confusion deepened. Thomas had said he was running an errand, but he'd been vague about it, just as he'd been about the shed. Why the secrecy? And why the rush to buy supplies in a storm? Daniel drove on, his mind churning. By the time he reached home, the snow was falling in thick curtains, obscuring the street. He carried the groceries inside, where Emily was scrubbing the kitchen counters, the house already smelling of fresh herbs. You're back fast, she said, taking a bag from him. Everything okay? Yeah, Daniel said, setting the bags on the counter. But I saw Thomas at the hardware store buying cement and lumber. Said he had an errand, but he didn't mention what. Emily paused, her brow furrowing. That's odd. Maybe he's just eager to finish that shed. Maybe, Daniel said, but the pieces didn't fit. Thomas's behavior, the shed, the supplies, it all felt like part of a larger puzzle, one he couldn't yet see. As he helped Emily unpack the groceries, he glanced out the window and saw Thomas's truck pull into his driveway. Thomas stepped out carrying a metal crate from the back. Inside, a dog, a German shepherd by the look of it, barked and shifted restlessly. He got a dog, Emily said, joining Daniel at the window. That's new. Yeah, Daniel murmured. And fast. He didn't mention anything about a dog this morning. They watched as Thomas struggled to carry the crate across his snowy yard, the dog's movements making it difficult. He's having trouble, Daniel said, grabbing his jacket. I'm going to help. Daniel, wait, Emily started, but he was already out the door. The cold hit him like a slap as he crossed the street. Thomas, he called, approaching. Need a hand with that? Thomas's head snapped up, his expression startled, almost alarmed. No, I'm fine, he said quickly, his voice sharper than necessary. I've got it. See you tonight. Daniel stopped, taken aback by the dismissal. All right, if you're sure, he said, raising his hands. Just thought I'd offer. Thomas nodded curtly, turning back to the crate. Daniel watched for a moment, then headed home, the unease now a steady pulse in his chest. Something wasn't right. Thomas's secrecy, the dog, the shed, it all added up to something. But what? As he stepped back into the warmth of his house, he resolved to keep a closer eye on his neighbor. For now, though, he had a dinner to prepare for, and a stack of case files that wouldn't let him rest. The afternoon sun struggled to pierce the heavy gray clouds over Willow Creek, casting a muted silver light across the snow-covered town. The storm had intensified, the wind whistling through the pines that bordered the Harpers' home, piling drifts against fences and mailboxes. Inside, the kitchen was warm, filled with the rich aroma of roasting beef and the faint sweetness of apples baking in the oven. Emily moved with purpose, chopping carrots with a steady rhythm, her hands steady even if her heart wasn't. The act of cooking, of preparing a meal for someone other than herself and Daniel, felt like a small rebellion against the grief that had defined their lives for 7 years. It was a gesture toward normalcy, however fragile. Daniel sat at the dining table, the police files spread before him like a map to nowhere. His eyes scanned a report from 2 years ago, a possible sighting of a girl resembling Lily in a shopping mall in Montpellier. The description was vague, a child with light brown hair about 9 years old, wearing a red coat. The lead had fizzled when the girl's parents, a couple from out of state, provided proof of her identity. Daniel rubbed his temples, the familiar headache creeping in. He'd read this report a dozen times, but each time he hoped for a detail he'd missed, a clue that would crack the case wide open. There was nothing. Just the same dead ends, the same hollow promises of hope. "Daniel," Emily called from the kitchen, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. "Can you set the table? I'm almost done with the vegetables." He glanced up, blinking as if waking from a trance. "Yeah, sure." He pushed the papers aside, stacking them neatly, and stood, stretching his stiff shoulders. The dining room was small, but cozy, with a bay window overlooking the street and a bookshelf lined with Emily's novels and Lily's old picture books. The table, now cleared of case files, felt oddly bare, like a stage waiting for actors. As he laid out plates and silverware, his mind drifted back to Thomas Reed. The neighbor's behavior that morning, the evasiveness about the shed, the quick dismissal, the sudden appearance of a German shepherd, gnawed at him. Thomas had always been private, but this felt different, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Daniel replayed their conversation in his head, the way Thomas had stood in front of the shed, his body language tense, almost protective. And then there was the hardware store, the bags of cement and lumber, and Thomas's claim of an errand that didn't add up. Why lie about something so mundane? Daniel said, folding napkins with more force than necessary. "You ever notice anything off about Thomas?" Emily paused, a knife hovering over a potato. "Off how?" she asked, her tone cautious. "I don't know. Just strange. He was cagey about that shed this morning, and then I saw him at the hardware store buying stuff like he's building something big. But he said it's just for storage. And then there's the dog. He didn't mention wanting one until today, and he was in and out of that store like he was on a mission." Emily set the knife down and wiped her hands on her apron. "He's been through a lot, Daniel. Losing his wife and son like that, it changes you. Maybe he's just trying to keep busy, to fill the void. A dog, a shed, those could be his way of moving forward." "Maybe," Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. He placed a fork beside a plate, his movements mechanical. "But why be so secretive about it? And why get a dog so fast? It's like he's hiding something." Emily's expression softened, but there was a hint of exasperation in her eyes. "Not everyone's hiding something, Daniel. Sometimes people just need space to grieve in their own way, like us." Daniel didn't respond. He knew she was right, at least in part. Grief had a way of warping perception, turning neighbors into suspects and coincidences into conspiracies. But the unease in his gut wouldn't let go. He finished setting the table in silence, the clink of silverware mingling with the howl of the wind outside. By 5 o'clock, the house was ready. The pot roast was simmering, the apple cobbler cooling on the counter, its golden crust glistening under the kitchen light. Emily had changed into a dark green sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, and Daniel had swapped his worn jeans for a clean pair and a button-up shirt. The effort felt foreign, like they were playing roles in a play they'd forgotten the lines to. They hadn't hosted anyone since Lily's disappearance, not since the casseroles and condolences had stopped coming, and their friends had slowly drifted away, unsure how to navigate their unending grief. "Do you think he'll show up?" Daniel asked, glancing at the clock. It was 10 minutes to 6, and the snow was falling harder now, the streetlights barely visible through the blizzard. "He said he'd try," Emily replied, arranging a vase of dried flowers on the table. "But if he doesn't, it's okay. At least we're trying." Daniel nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He kept picturing Thomas's backyard, the shed, the German Shepherd in its crate. The dog had been restless, barking in a way that felt more like a warning than excitement, and that tapping sound. What had Thomas been working on? The shed looked old, not like something under active construction. The new lumber and cement suggested something bigger, something hidden. The doorbell rang at exactly 6, a sharp chime that made Daniel's heart skip. Emily smoothed her sweater and hurried to the door, her smile bright but nervous. Daniel followed, wiping his palms on his jeans. When Emily opened the door, Thomas stood on the porch, his coat dusted with snow, holding a bottle of red wine. His gray hair was damp and his face, usually stoic, carried a faint unease. "Hope this is okay," Thomas said, handing the bottle to Emily. "Didn't know what you were serving, but red goes with most things." "It's perfect," Emily said warmly, stepping aside. "Come in. Get out of the cold." Thomas hesitated, then stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. He hung his coat on the rack by the door, revealing a faded flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better days. His movements were deliberate, as if he were measuring each step, and his eyes darted around the room, taking in the dining table, the warm light, the smell of dinner. "Thank you for coming," Emily said, leading him to the table. "It's been too long since we've had anyone over." Thomas nodded, his lips twitching into something that might have been a smile. "Appreciate the invite. Been a while since I've done this." Daniel watched him closely, noting the slight tremor in Thomas's hands as he sat down. Was it nerves, guilt, or just the cold? Daniel poured the wine, the ruby liquid glinting in the glasses, and tried to shake off his suspicions. Emily was right. They'd been isolated too long, seeing shadows where there were none. The conversation started light, centered on safe topics. The storm, the upcoming town fair, the new coffee shop that had opened on Main Street. Emily was a natural host, her warmth easing the awkwardness that hung in the air. Thomas answered politely, but his responses were short, his eyes often drifting to the window, where the snow swirled in chaotic patterns. As Emily served the pot, roast, Daniel decided to steer the conversation toward the day's events. "So, Thomas," he said, cutting into his meat, "that German Shepherd you got today, how's it settling in?" Thomas's fork paused halfway to his mouth, and for a split second his expression tightened. "It's adjusting," he said, setting the fork down. "Still getting used to the new place. Dogs take time, you know." Daniel nodded, but his eyes stayed on Thomas. "Must have been a quick trip to the breeder. I saw you at the hardware store earlier, and then you were back with the dog in no time." Thomas's gaze flickered, and he reached for his wine glass, taking a slow sip. "Yeah, well, I'd been thinking about it for a while. Saw an ad online, made a call, and they had one ready. Just picked it up." Daniel leaned back, his tone casual but probing. "I used to help out at a kennel when I was a kid. Paperwork. For those adoptions usually takes a bit. Health records, contracts. They move fast around here, huh?" Thomas shifted in his chair, his fingers tightening around the glass. "It was straightforward. Breeder had everything ready. I just signed and paid." Emily shot Daniel a look, her eyes pleading for him to ease up. She turned to Thomas, her voice gentle. "It's great that you're getting a dog, Thomas. It must feel good to have some company again." Thomas's shoulders relaxed slightly and he nodded. "Yeah, been alone too long. Figured a dog might change things." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Daniel's mind was racing. Thomas's explanation about the dog didn't add up. He'd claimed that morning he wasn't sure what kind of pet he wanted, yet he'd supposedly arranged everything in advance. And the hardware store purchases, cement and lumber, weren't typical for organizing tools. They were for building, something substantial, something meant to last. As they ate, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Emily brought out the apple cobbler, its warm cinnamon scent filling the room. Thomas complimented the food, but his unease was palpable, his eyes darting to the window more frequently now. Daniel watched him, the pieces of the puzzle refusing to fit. Thomas's behavior wasn't just odd. It was evasive, almost rehearsed. Halfway through dessert, Thomas set his fork down and stood abruptly. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tight. "I just remembered the dog's still outside in the crate. With this storm picking up, I should check on it. Don't want it getting too stressed." Emily stood, concern creasing her brow. "Of course, Thomas. Do you need help bringing it in?" No, Thomas said quickly, almost too quickly. "It's a German Shepherd, a bit skittish around new people. I'll handle it and come back after." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You? Sure. It's brutal out there. I can give you a hand." Thomas shook his head, already moving toward the door. "I'm good. I'll be quick." He grabbed his coat. No, he didn't. In his haste, he left it hanging on the rack, his scarf dangling beside it. Emily closed the door behind him, the cold air lingering in the entryway. "That was abrupt," she said, her voice soft but troubled. "Yeah," Daniel agreed, staring at the empty chair where Thomas had sat. "He's been off all day. First the shed, then the hardware store, now this. He's hiding something, Em." She sighed, picking up a plate to clear the table. "He's probably just nervous. It's been years since he's socialized like this. And he's worried about the dog. It's understandable." Daniel didn't respond. He helped clear the dishes, but his mind was elsewhere. Thomas had left, the dog outside in a blizzard, despite saying he was going to check on it. The same dog he'd supposedly just adopted, yet acted like he barely knew. And the shed. What was he really building? The tapping sound, the cement, the lumber, it all pointed to something more than storage. As they washed dishes, the clock ticked past 7. Thomas didn't return. The cobbler sat untouched on the counter, and the house grew quiet, save for the storm's relentless howl. Emily glanced at the coat rack, her brow furrowing. "He forgot his scarf," she said. "It's freezing out." "There. I'll take it to him," Daniel said, grabbing his jacket. "And check if he's okay. He's been gone too long." Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful, Daniel. The roads are bad, and I don't like how this storm's shaping up." He pulled on his boots and grabbed Thomas's scarf, the wool soft but cold in his hands. Stepping outside, the wind hit him like a wall, snow stinging his face. The street was a white blur, the streetlights faint halos in the blizzard. Thomas's house was dark, except for a faint glow from the back, likely the kitchen. Daniel crossed the street, his boots sinking into the snow, and knocked on the front door. No answer. He knocked again, harder, the sound swallowed by the wind. After a minute, he heard it again, the tapping, faint but unmistakable, coming from the backyard. Concern outweighing caution, Daniel rounded the house, clutching the scarf. The backyard was a mess of snow, the shed barely visible in the dim light spilling from the kitchen window. The German Shepherd was still in its crate, chained to a stake near the shed, barking frantically. Its fur was matted with snow, and it tugged against the chain, its eyes fixed on the shed. "Thomas," Daniel called, his voice nearly lost in the storm. "You okay? I brought your scarf." No response. The tapping stopped, replaced by the dog's insistent barking. Daniel approached the crate, keeping his distance from the agitated animal. The shed loomed behind it, its door padlocked, but something caught his eye. A pile of tools and boards near the base, partially covered by snow. Kneeling, he brushed the snow aside and froze. Beneath the pile was a wooden panel, not part of the shed's structure, with a metal handle and an unlocked padlock resting on top. It looked like a trapdoor, hidden in plain sight. Daniel's heart pounded. Why would Thomas have a trapdoor under a shed? And why was the dog so fixated on it? He glanced at the house, but there was no sign of Thomas. The kitchen light flickered, but no one appeared. Pulling out his phone, Daniel dialed Thomas's number, his fingers numb from the cold. It went straight to voicemail. The dog's barking grew more intense, its attention locked on the trapdoor. Daniel hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. He'd promised Emily he'd be careful, but the trapdoor, the dog, Thomas's lies, it all screamed that something was wrong. He needed to know what. "Daniel?" Emily's voice came from behind him, startling him. She stood at the edge of the yard, her coat pulled tight against the wind. "What are you doing? It's freezing." He turned, holding up a hand. There's something weird here. There's a trapdoor under the shed like a bunker or something, and the dog's going crazy." Emily's eyes widened as she approached, peering at the panel. "A bunker? Are you sure?" "Look at it," Daniel said, pointing. "It's not. Just a shed floor, and Thomas has been lying all day, about the shed, the dog, everything." Emily's face paled, but she shook her head. "We should call the police. If something's wrong, they need to handle it." Daniel nodded, his breath visible in the cold. "You're right. My phone's low. Can you call them? Tell them it's a welfare check. Thomas isn't answering, his car's here, but he's not." "Okay," Emily said, pulling out her phone. "But promise me you won't do anything stupid. Come back home and wait for the police." "I promise," Daniel said, but his eyes stayed on the trapdoor. As Emily dialed, he took a step closer, the dog's barking echoing in his ears. Whatever Thomas was hiding, it was down there. And something told Daniel it was more than just tools or a new project. The wind howled through Willow Creek, a relentless banshee that tore at the pines and buried the town in a shroud of white. The snow fell in thick, blinding curtains, reducing visibility to a few feet. Daniel Harper stood in Thomas Reed's backyard, his boots sinking into the drifts, his breath forming fleeting clouds in the frigid air. The German shepherd, chained near the shed, barked furiously, its eyes locked on the trapdoor Daniel had uncovered beneath a pile of tools and snow. The wooden panel, with its metal handle and unlocked padlock, seemed out of place in the weathered shed, a secret hidden in plain sight. Emily stood beside him, her phone pressed to her ear, her face pale against the dark hood of her coat. "Daniel, I'm calling the police," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "This is too strange. Come back home and wait with me." Daniel nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the trapdoor. The dog's barking, Thomas's evasiveness, the cement and lumber from the hardware store, it all pointed to something hidden, something wrong. His heart pounded, a mix of fear and a desperate, irrational hope he hadn't felt in years. "I will," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Just let me make sure Thomas isn't in trouble. He's not answering, and his car's still here." Emily's eyes narrowed. "You promised you wouldn't do anything stupid. The police can handle this." "I'm not," Daniel insisted, though the lie felt heavy on his tongue. "I'll just check the shed. If he's not here, I'll come back." Before Emily could protest further, a faint noise cut through the storm. A metallic clang like a latch being undone, coming from the trapdoor. Daniel froze, his pulse racing. The dog's barking grew more frantic, its chain rattling as it strained. Toward the shed. Emily lowered her phone, her call to the police still connecting, and grabbed Daniel's arm. "What was that?" "I don't know," Daniel whispered, his eyes locked on the trapdoor. The sound came again, clearer now. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, climbing metal stairs from below. Someone was in there. "Thomas," Daniel called, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind. "It's Daniel. Are you okay?" No response. The footsteps grew louder, each one a hammer against Daniel's nerves. The trapdoor shifted slightly, the padlock sliding to the side with a soft clink. Emily's grip tightened on his arm. "Daniel, we need to go. Now." But he couldn't move. 7 years of searching for Lily, of chasing dead ends and clinging to scraps of hope, had led him here, to this moment. If there was even a chance that something, or someone, was down there. He had to know. He took a step closer, ignoring Emily's whispered protest, and knelt beside the trapdoor. The wooden panel was heavy, but it moved easily on hidden hinges, revealing a dark, narrow opening. A rusted metal ladder descended into the shadows, its rungs glinting faintly in the dim light from the kitchen window. Before Daniel could decide what to do, the trapdoor swung fully open, and a figure emerged, crawling awkwardly from the narrow space. Thomas Reed straightened, his gray hair disheveled, his face a mask of shock as he saw Daniel standing there. For a moment, neither man moved, the storm's roar filling the silence. Then Thomas's expression darkened, a mix of fear and something harder, more dangerous. "Daniel," Thomas said, his voice low and controlled, but with an edge that sent a chill down Daniel's spine. "What the hell are you doing here?" Daniel held up Thomas's scarf, his hand steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "You left this at our house. You didn't come back, so I brought it over. Then I heard the dog barking and—" "What's this, Thomas?" He gestured at the open trapdoor, his voice sharp. "What's down there?" Thomas's eyes flicked to the trapdoor, then back to Daniel. "Nothing that concerns you," he said, taking a step forward. "You need to leave. Now." But Daniel didn't move. The dog's barking, Thomas's lies, the hidden bunker. It all clicked into place, a puzzle he couldn't ignore. "You've been lying all day," he said, his voice rising. "The shed, the dog, the hardware store. You said you were organizing tools, but you're building something. You said you were meeting friends, but you were alone. And now this?" He pointed at the trapdoor. "What are you hiding, Thomas?" Emily stepped forward, her phone still in hand. "Daniel, stop! The police are on their way. Let them handle this." Thomas's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing. "You called the cops?" His voice was low, almost a growl, and for the first time, Daniel saw real panic in his neighbor's face. "We were worried," Emily said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You weren't answering, and—" "Now this bunker, Thomas, what's going on?" Thomas's jaw tightened and he took another step toward Daniel, his hands clenching into fists. "You should have minded your own business," he said, his voice trembling with rage. Without warning, he lunged, grabbing Daniel's jacket and shoving him backward with surprising strength. Daniel stumbled in the snow, catching himself before he fell. "Thomas, stop!" he shouted. But Thomas was already on him, landing a hard punch to Daniel's stomach. The air rushed from his lungs, and he doubled over, gasping. Emily screamed, dropping her phone as she rushed forward, but Thomas pushed, her back, his face contorted with desperation. "Stay out of this," Thomas snarled, turning back to Daniel. He swung again, aiming for Daniel's face, but Daniel blocked the blow, years of manual labor giving him the strength to hold his own. He grabbed Thomas's arm, twisting it until Thomas grunted in pain, and pushed him away. "What are you hiding?" Daniel demanded, circling warily now, his breath coming in sharp bursts. The dog's barking was a deafening chorus, its chain rattling as it lunged toward the shed. Thomas didn't answer. His eyes darted to the trapdoor, then back to Daniel, and in that moment Daniel saw something new in his neighbor's face. Fear, yes, but also a kind of resigned determination. Thomas reached behind his back, and Daniel's blood ran cold as he saw the glint of metal. A handgun, small but deadly, appeared in Thomas's hand, its barrel trained on Daniel's chest. "Get in there," Thomas said, his voice eerily calm now, gesturing toward the trapdoor. "Climb down, or I swear I'll shoot." Emily gasped, stepping back. "Thomas, please," she pleaded. "Whatever this is, you don't have to do this." But Thomas's eyes were fixed on Daniel, unyielding. "You heard me. Down." Daniel raised his hands, his mind racing. The police were coming. Emily had called them. But how long would it take in this storm? He needed to stall, to keep Thomas talking. "The police are on their way," he said, his voice steady despite the gun. "If you shoot, every neighbor will hear it. You'll have no way out." Thomas's face twitched, frustration flashing in his eyes. He stepped closer, the gun unwavering, and for a moment, Daniel thought he might actually pull the trigger. But instead, Thomas swung the gun, striking Daniel across the face with the handle. Pain exploded above Daniel's eye, and he stumbled, blood trickling down his cheek. Emily screamed again, rushing to his side, but Thomas grabbed her arm, pulling. "Her back! Stay back!" Thomas shouted, his voice cracking. He turned to Daniel, who was struggling to his feet, and pointed the gun at the trapdoor. "Last chance. Get in." Daniel wiped the blood from his face, his vision swimming. He straightened, wincing, and took a step toward Thomas, defiance overriding fear. "You can't make me go down there," he said, his voice low but firm. "Whatever you're hiding, it's over." Thomas's face contorted and he lunged again, shoving Daniel toward the trapdoor. They grappled in the snow, Daniel's hands closing around Thomas's wrist, twisting until the gun fell, skittering across the shed's wooden floor and disappearing into the dark opening below. Thomas roared in frustration, slamming his shoulder into Daniel and knocking him against the shed. The impact rattled Daniel's bones, but he held his ground, grabbing Thomas's jacket and using his weight to throw him off balance. In the distance, the wail of sirens pierced the storm, growing louder with each second. Thomas's head snapped up, panic replacing rage. Red and blue lights flashed through the snow, illuminating the backyard as two police cruisers pulled into the driveway. Doors slammed, and officers emerged, their flashlights cutting through the blizzard. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" one officer shouted, his hand on his holster. Daniel raised his hands, his chest heaving. Thomas hesitated, his eyes darting between the officers and the trapdoor, then slowly raised his hands, his face a mask of defeat. The officers moved quickly, one checking Daniel's bleeding face while the other restrained Thomas, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. "What's going on here?" The lead officer, a stocky man with a graying mustache, demanded. Daniel caught his breath, wincing as he touched the cut above his eye. "He attacked me," he said, pointing at Thomas. "I found a trapdoor under the shed like a bunker. He's been lying all day about the shed. A dog, he just got everything. When I confronted him, he pulled a gun." The officer's eyes narrowed as he looked at Thomas. "Is that true, sir? Did you assault this man and threaten him with a firearm?" Thomas said nothing, his gaze fixed on the ground. The officer began reciting his rights, his voice steady despite the storm. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Emily rushed to Daniel's side, her hands trembling as she touched his face. "Are you okay?" she asked, tears mixing with the snow on her cheeks. "I'm fine," Daniel said, though the pain in his face and ribs said otherwise. He glanced at the trapdoor, still open, its dark mouth a mystery that gnawed at him. "But we need to know what's down there." The second officer, a younger woman with sharp eyes, approached the trapdoor, shining her flashlight into the darkness. "There's a ladder," she reported. "Looks like it leads to some kind of underground room." Before anyone could respond, a new sound came from the bunker, a faint rustling, followed by the unmistakable clank of footsteps on metal rungs. Everyone froze, the officers drawing their weapons and training them on the opening. The German shepherd's barking reached a fever pitch, its chain straining as it lunged toward the trapdoor. "Stay back," the lead officer shouted, motioning for Daniel and Emily to move away. Emily clutched Daniel's arm, her breath hitching. The footsteps grew louder, closer, each one a heartbeat in the tense silence. Then slowly, a figure emerged from the darkness, climbing awkwardly into the shed. It was a girl, no more than 13, her frame thin and pale, her light brown hair tangled and long. She wore a faded sweater and jeans, her eyes wide with fear as they adjusted to the flashlight beams. In her trembling hands she held the gun Thomas had dropped, its barrel shaking as she pointed it at the crowd. "Stay back!" the girl cried, her voice high and panicked. "I won't let you take him. He's my dad." The officers tensed, their weapons raised but hesitant. "Sweetheart, put the gun down," the female officer said, her voice calm but firm. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." The girl's eyes darted to Thomas, who stood handcuffed, his head bowed. "Dad, tell them," she pleaded. "Tell them we're protecting the house. You said the fire took everything, that they're coming for us." Daniel stared at the girl, a numbness spreading through him that had nothing to do with the cold. Her face, though older and gaunt, was achingly familiar. The curve of her cheek, the green of her eyes, the way her hair fell across her forehead. It couldn't be. After 7 years, it couldn't be. Lily, he whispered, the name escaping, before he could stop it. The girl's eyes flicked to him, confusion clouding her fear. "What?" she said, her voice trembling. "Who are you?" Daniel took a step forward, ignoring the officer's warning to stay back. His heart pounded, hope and disbelief warring within him. "Lily, it's me. It's Dad. Your real Dad," the girl's hands shook, the gun wavering. "You're lying," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "My dad's right there. He said my parents died in the fire. He said the town burned, that we had to hide." Emily stepped forward now, tears streaming down her face. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she opened the screen to a photo of Lily at 6, smiling in a bright red coat, a snowman behind her. "Lily, sweetheart," Emily said, her voice breaking. "This is you. We're your parents. We've been looking for you for 7 years. The girl stared at the photo, her resolve faltering. She looked at Thomas, searching for an explanation, but he refused to meet her gaze. His shoulders slumped. "Dad?" she said, her voice small. Taking advantage of her distraction, the female officer moved swiftly, gently taking the gun from the girl's hands and securing it. The girl, Lily, didn't resist, her eyes still fixed on the phone, a flicker of recognition breaking through her confusion. "There's no fire, Lily," Emily said, stepping closer. "There was never a fire. You were taken from us. We've been searching for you every day." Lily's knees buckled and she sank to the shed floor, her breath coming in short gasps. The officers lowered their weapons, one radioing for backup and an ambulance. Emily knelt beside her, cautious but desperate to close the distance. "It's okay," she whispered, reaching out but stopping short of touching her. "You're safe now." Daniel's legs felt weak, but he forced himself to stay upright. His eyes locked on the daughter he'd thought he'd lost forever. She was here, alive, just across the street all this time. The realization was a knife, cutting through 7 years of grief and igniting a fragile, trembling hope. The ambulance arrived minutes later, its lights cutting through the snow. Paramedics rushed to Lily, wrapping her in a blanket and guiding her to the vehicle. Emily followed, unwilling to let her daughter out of her sight, while Daniel gave a quick statement to the officers, his voice mechanical as he recounted the night's events. Thomas was led to a police car, his silence damning. As the paramedics checked Lily's vitals, Daniel stood by the ambulance, the snow soaking through his jacket. "How is she?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "She's malnourished, likely dehydrated," one paramedic said. "No visible injuries, but we need to get her to a hospital for a full exam." "Can we go with her?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "Of course," the paramedic said. "She's scared and confused. Having you there might help." Daniel nodded, climbing into the ambulance beside Emily. Lily sat on the stretcher, her eyes darting between them, still wary but softening. The doors closed, and as the vehicle pulled away, Daniel looked out at Thomas's house, now surrounded by police tape. The shed, the trapdoor, the bunker. It had been there all along, hiding their daughter in plain sight. The ambulance cut through the blizzard, its siren a faint wail against the howling wind that battered Willow Creek. Inside, the air was thick with antiseptic and tension, the dim light casting shadows across Lily Harper's pale face. She sat on the stretcher, wrapped in a gray shock blanket, her thin frame dwarfed by the oversized sweater she wore. Her green eyes, so like Emily's, darted between the paramedics, the equipment, and the 2 strangers who claimed to be her parents. Daniel and Emily sat across from her, their hands clasped tightly, as if anchoring each other against the surreal weight of the moment. After 7 years of searching, their daughter was here, alive. But the girl staring back at them was a stranger, shaped by lies and isolation. Outside, the snow continued its relentless assault, blanketing the narrow roads and pine forests that surrounded Willow Creek. The town, nestled in a Vermont valley, seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing the seismic shift that had just occurred. The ambulance's tires crunched over the snow, the driver navigating carefully toward Maple Hollow Memorial Hospital, a small facility 20 minutes away. Daniel's face throbbed where Thomas's gun had struck him, the cut above his eye bandaged, but still seeping blood. His ribs ached from the struggle, but the physical pain was a distant hum compared to the storm of emotions raging within him. Relief, disbelief, and a gnawing fear that Lily's return was only the beginning of a new kind of battle. Emily reached out, her hand hovering near Lily's but not touching, as if afraid to break the fragile connection forming between them. "Lily," she said, softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're going to take care of you. You're safe now." Lily's eyes flicked to her, wary but curious. "You're really my mom?" she asked, her voice small, almost lost in the hum of the ambulance. "Yes," Emily said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "And this is your dad. We've been looking for you every single day since you were taken." Lily's brow furrowed, her hands tightening around the blanket. Thomas, said my parents died in a fire. He said the whole town burned, that we had to stay hidden because it wasn't safe." She paused, her gaze dropping to her lap. "He said he was my dad." Daniel's chest tightened, a mix of anger and sorrow surging through him. Thomas Reed, their quiet, grieving neighbor, had stolen their daughter and built a world of lies to keep her imprisoned. The thought that Lily had been just across the street, hidden beneath a shed in a Cold War-era bunker, was a knife twisting in his gut. He wanted to ask her everything, how she'd survived, what Thomas had done to her. But the fear in her eyes stopped him. She was fragile, teetering on the edge of a reality she'd been taught to distrust. "It's okay," Daniel said, his voice gentle but thick with emotion. "There was no fire, Lily. Thomas lied to you. We're here now and we're not going anywhere." Lily didn't respond, her eyes drifting to the ambulance window, where the snow swirled in chaotic patterns. The paramedic, a young woman with a calm demeanor, checked Lily's pulse and offered a reassuring smile. "We're almost at the hospital," she said. "They'll take good care of you there." The ambulance pulled into the hospital's emergency bay, its lights reflecting off the snow-covered pavement. The doors swung open, and a blast of cold air rushed in as paramedics guided Lily's stretcher inside. Daniel and Emily followed, their boots leaving wet tracks on the linoleum floor. The hospital was quiet, its halls lit by harsh fluorescent lights, the air heavy with the scent of disinfectant. A nurse led them to a small examination room, where Lily was settled onto a bed, her blanket still clutched tightly around her. Dr. Patel, a pediatrician with kind eyes and a clipboard, entered shortly after. "I'm going to run some tests," she said, her voice professional but warm. "She's likely malnourished and may have other deficiencies from prolonged time indoors. We'll need to check her overall health." "Can we stay with her?" Emily asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Of course," Dr. Patel said. "But she's been through a lot. Keep things calm and don't push her to talk until she's ready." Daniel nodded, his eyes never leaving Lily. She looked so small in the hospital bed, her hair tangled, her skin almost translucent under the lights. The vibrant 6-year-old who'd loved building snowmen and reading picture books was gone, replaced by this wary, fragile teenager. Yet her face, the shape of her jaw, the freckles across her nose, was unmistakably hers, a ghost of the child they'd lost. As Dr. Patel began her examination, a police officer entered the room, her badge identifying her as Detective Martinez. She was in her 30s with sharp features and a notepad in hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Harper," she said, her tone gentle but authoritative. "I need to ask you a few questions about what happened tonight. And Lily, when you're ready, we'd like to hear from you too." Lily's eyes widened and she shrank back against the pillow. Emily placed a hand on her shoulder, careful not to overwhelm her. "It's okay, sweetheart. They just want to understand what happened." Detective Martinez nodded, pulling up a chair. "We've got Thomas Reed in custody. He's not talking much, but we're piecing things together. Can you tell me how you found the bunker?" Daniel recounted the day's events, Thomas's evasiveness about the shed, the hardware store trip, the German shepherd, the strange noises, and the trap door. He described the confrontation, the gun, and the moment Lily emerged, holding the weapon Thomas had dropped. His voice shook as he spoke, the reality of it all still sinking in. Emily added details about the dinner, Thomas's abrupt departure, and her call to the police when Daniel didn't return. Martinez jotted notes, her expression grave. "And Lily," she said, turning to the girl. "Can you tell me what it was? Like living with Thomas? Did he ever hurt you?" Lily hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. "He didn't hurt me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He taught me things. How to read, how to fix stuff. He said we had to stay in the bunker because the world outside was dangerous. He said there was a fire, and people were fighting over what was left." She paused, her eyes distant. "He made me train. Running in place, lifting things. Said I had to be strong to survive. And recently, he showed me how to use the gun. He said I'd need it if the bad people came." Daniel's stomach churned. Thomas had brainwashed her, constructing a fiction of a post-apocalyptic world to keep her compliant. He glanced at Emily, whose face was pale, her eyes brimming with tears. "Do you know what year it is, Lily?" Martinez asked gently. Lily frowned, her brow furrowing. "Thomas said it doesn't matter underground. Time's different when you're hiding. He said it was, 2018 maybe?" Martinez exchanged a glance with Daniel and Emily. "It's 2025, Lily. You've been missing for 7 years. Lily's eyes widened, and she looked down at her hands, as if trying to process the weight of those lost years. 7 years? She whispered. "But I don't remember anything before the bunker. Just what Thomas told me." "There was no fire," Emily said softly, her voice steady despite her tears. "You lived with us, here in Willow Creek. You loved playing in the backyard, reading stories, drawing pictures. We never stopped looking for you." Lily's expression wavered, a mix of confusion and something deeper, like a memory stirring beneath the surface. But she didn't respond, her gaze dropping back to the blanket. Martinez closed her notepad. "That's enough for now. Lily, you're doing great. We'll talk more when you're ready." She turned to Daniel and Emily. "We're searching Reed's property now. The bunker's fully stocked. Food, water, a generator, even books and old board games. It looks like he was prepared for a long stay. We also found several firearms, including the one Lily was holding." Daniel's mind reeled. "The dog," he said suddenly. "He got the German Shepherd to guard the bunker, didn't he? To keep her from leaving." "That's our working theory," Martinez said. The dog was a recent addition, likely because Lily was getting older, more curious. The new shed he was building, it was probably meant to better conceal the trapdoor. Emily covered her mouth, stifling a sob. "He kept her there all this time, right across the street. How did we not know?" Martinez's expression softened. "People like Reed are good at hiding. He'd been a recluse for years and no one had reason to suspect him, but we'll get answers. For now, focus on your daughter." The doctor finished her examination and approached them, her clipboard tucked under her arm. Physically, Lily's malnourished and shows signs of vitamin D deficiency, which is expected after years underground. Her muscle development is below average, but there's no evidence of physical abuse. She's been fed regularly and the bunker was clean. We'll keep her overnight for observation and start addressing her nutritional needs. "Can we stay with her?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. "Yes," Dr. Patel said, "but she's processing a lot. Be patient. She may not recognize you as her parents yet. But small familiar things, like your voices or stories, might help." They nodded, settling into chairs beside Lily's bed. The hospital room was stark, its white walls and beeping monitors a harsh contrast to the warm chaos of their home. Lily lay back, her eyes heavy, but she didn't sleep, her gaze flickering between Daniel, Emily, and the window where the snow continued to fall. As the night wore on, the hospital grew quieter, the storm's roar muffled by the thick walls. Detective Martinez returned with an update. "We found journals in the bunker," she said. "Reed wrote extensively about his life after losing his family. It seems their deaths triggered a mental break. He became obsessed with creating a new family, a safe one he could protect. We think that's why he took Lily, to replace the son he lost." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "He stole her from us," he said, his voice low with anger. He lied to her, kept her locked away, and told her we were dead. Martinez nodded. It's a lot to process. We're charging him with kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault, and weapons violations. The journals will help build the case. But it'll take time. Emily wiped her eyes. What happens to Lily now? Can she come home with us? She'll need to stay here for a few days, Martinez said. Social services will be involved to ensure a smooth transition. She'll also need therapy to address the psychological impact of what she's been through. But yes, the goal is to reunite her with you. Daniel looked at Lily, who was watching them with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The road ahead would be long, fraught with challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But she was here, alive, and that was more than they dared hope for in 7 years. As morning light filtered through the hospital window, painting the room in soft grays, Daniel and Emily took turns sitting by Lily's side. They spoke softly, sharing small stories about her childhood, her favorite book, The Snowy Day, the way she'd giggle when Daniel tossed her into a snowbank, the drawings she'd taped to the fridge. Lily listened, her expression guarded but softening, as if searching for echoes of those memories in the fog of her mind. Lily, Emily said at one point, holding up a photo from her phone. This was you at your 5th birthday. We had a cake shaped like a butterfly and you insisted on wearing your fairy wings all day. Lily studied the photo, her fingers brushing the screen. I think I remember wings, she said hesitantly. They were sparkly, right? Emily's breath caught, and she nodded, tears spilling over. Yes, they were sparkly. You loved them. Daniel's heart swelled, a fragile hope taking root. It was a small moment, a flicker of connection, but it was enough to carry them forward. Outside, the storm had eased, the snow settling into a quiet blanket over Willow Creek. For the first time in 7 years, the world felt a little less heavy. Snow had stopped falling by the time the sun rose over Willow Creek, leaving the town draped in a pristine, glittering blanket. The pines stood sentinel around the valley, their branches heavy with fresh powder, while the rooftops of Main Street gleamed under the pale morning light. At Maple Hollow Memorial Hospital, the world felt quieter, as if the storm's departure had left space for something new to take root. Inside a small, sterile room, Lily Harper lay in a hospital bed, her light brown hair fanned across the pillow, her green eyes fixed on the ceiling. The shock blanket was gone, replaced by a soft hospital gown, but the wariness in her expression remained, a reminder of the 7 years stolen from her. Daniel and Emily Harper sat beside her, their chairs pulled close to the bed, their hands clasped tightly. The past 24 hours had been a whirlwind. Lily's emergence from the bunker, Thomas Reed's arrest, the flood of police and paramedics into their quiet neighborhood. Daniel's face still ached, the cut above his eye stitched and bandaged, his ribs tender but unbroken. Emily's eyes were red from tears and sleeplessness, but there was a light in them, a fragile hope that hadn't been there in years. They were together again, their family whole, yet the road ahead loomed uncertain, a path through uncharted terrain. Lily stirred, her gaze shifting to Daniel and Emily. Are you really going to take me home? She asked, her voice small but steady, as if testing the reality she'd been thrust into. Yes, Emily said softly, leaning forward. If you're okay with that, we've kept your room just the way it was, but we'll go at your pace, Lily. Whatever you need. Lily's brow furrowed, and she looked down at her hands, picking at the edge of the blanket. I don't remember. It, she admitted. The room, the house, any of it. Thomas said, he said my home burned down, that you were gone. Daniel's throat tightened, a surge of anger toward Thomas mixing with sorrow for the years lost. He lied to you, Lily, he said, his voice gentle but firm. There was no fire. You lived with us here in Willow Creek. You loved playing in the snow, drawing pictures, reading stories with your mom. We never stopped looking for you. Lily's eyes flickered with something, confusion perhaps, or the faint stir of a memory buried deep. I want to believe you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it's hard. Everything feels wrong. Emily reached out, her hand hovering near Lily's before settling back in her lap. That's okay, she said, her voice thick with emotion. We have time. We'll figure it out together. Dr. Patel entered, her clipboard in hand, her expression calm but professional. Good morning, she said, offering a small smile. Lily, your tests look stable. You're malnourished and have a vitamin D deficiency, which we'll address, with supplements and a tailored diet. Physically, you're in decent shape, considering the circumstances. No signs of abuse, which is a relief. Daniel exhaled, a weight lifting slightly. How long does she need to stay here? He asked. Day or two, Dr. Patel replied. We want to monitor her hydration and start her on a nutrition plan. Psychologically, though, she'll need ongoing support. I've arranged for a child therapist to meet with her this afternoon. She's been through significant trauma, and her worldview has been shaped by isolation and deception. Reintegration will take time. Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. Can we stay with her for the therapy? Absolutely, Dr. Patel said. Your presence will help ground her, but don't push for too much too soon. Small, familiar things, stories, photos, even smells can help trigger memories. As the doctor left, Detective Martinez arrived, her notepad tucked under her arm. Mr. and Mrs. Harper, she said, nodding to them. Lily, how are you feeling? Lily shrugged, her eyes darting to the window. Okay, I guess. Martinez pulled up a chair, her tone gentle but focused. We've been going through Reed's property in the bunker. I wanted to update you and see if Lily's ready to share a bit more. Daniel's jaw tightened at the mention of Thomas. What did you find? He asked. Martinez glanced at Lily, then back to Daniel and Emily. The bunker's a Cold War-era fallout shelter, built decades ago. Reed modified it over the years, added a generator, air filtration, shelves of canned food, even a small library of books and old board games. It's designed for long-term habitation. We found more journals, detailing his plans to protect Lily, as he saw it. He wrote about losing his wife and son in that car accident 10 years ago. It seems their deaths broke something in him. He became fixated on creating a new family, one he could keep safe from the world. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. So he took our daughter to replace his son? It looks that way, Martinez said. The journals suggest he saw Lily playing in your backyard that day, during the snowstorm. It was an impulsive act, but once he had her, he built this elaborate lie about a fire destroying the town, convincing her the outside world was dangerous. The German Shepherd was a recent addition, likely to guard the bunker as Lily got older and more curious. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. He kept her locked away right across the street for 7 years. How did no one notice? Martinez's expression was grim. Reed was a recluse. After his family's death, he withdrew from the community, kept to himself. No one had reason to suspect him. The bunker was well hidden under the shed, and he was careful, only going out for supplies, always at odd hours. Lily listened, her face pale, her eyes wide. He said he was protecting me, she said, her voice trembling. He told me stories about the fire, about people fighting outside. He taught me how to hide, how to be quiet. He said if I left, I'd die. Emily reached out again, this time gently touching Lily's hand. Lily flinched, but didn't pull. Away, allowing the contact. You're safe now, Emily said. He can't hurt you anymore. Martinez nodded. Reed's been charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault, and multiple weapons violations. The journals and physical evidence are strong. He's not talking, but we don't need him to. The case is solid. What happens next? Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. Social services will work with you to ensure Lily's transition home is smooth, Martinez said. She'll need regular therapy, and we'll need her to provide a statement when she's ready. For now, focus on being there for her. The rest will follow. As Martinez left, the therapist arrived, a woman named Dr. Ellis, with a warm smile, and a notebook filled with colorful stickers. She spoke softly to Lily, asking about her favorite books and games, easing her into conversation. Daniel and Emily stepped back, giving them space, but stayed close, watching through the glass window of the room. Lily's responses were hesitant, but she engaged, her shoulders relaxing slightly as Dr. Ellis showed her a drawing pad and crayons. "She's going to be okay," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if saying it too loudly might break the fragile hope. Daniel nodded, but his mind was still reeling. Lily was alive, but the girl they'd lost was buried under years of lies. Rebuilding their family would mean starting from scratch, navigating a landscape of trauma and distrust. Yet the sight of her, sitting up in bed, sketching with the therapist, was a miracle he hadn't dared dream of. Over the next few days, the hospital became a temporary home. Daniel and Emily took shifts by Lily's side, bringing photo albums, her old stuffed rabbit, and a copy of the snowy day they'd kept on her shelf. They read to her, shared stories of her childhood, and answered her cautious questions. "Did I have a dog?" she asked once, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Did I like school?" Each question was a bridge, small but vital, connecting her to the life she'd forgotten. Willow Creek, meanwhile, buzzed with the news. The story of Lily's discovery spread like wildfire, reporters clamoring for interviews, their vans parked along Main Street despite the lingering snow. Daniel and Emily declined every request, shielding Lily from the spotlight. The town, shaken by the revelation that one of their own had harbored such a secret, rallied around the Harpers. Neighbors dropped off casseroles, cards, and flowers, their gestures a mix of guilt and relief. A vigil was held outside the church, candles flickering in the snow as residents prayed for Lily's recovery. By the third day, Lily was cleared to leave the hospital. Social services approved her return home, with the condition of regular check-ins and therapy sessions. Daniel and Emily drove her back to Willow Creek, the roads now plowed but still treacherous. Lily sat in the back seat, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes fixed on the passing landscape, snow-covered fields, the frozen Willow River, the familiar storefronts of Main Street. It was all new to her, a world she'd been told no longer existed. Their house felt different when they walked in, as if Lily's presence had shifted its very foundation. Her room, untouched for 7 years, was a time capsule. Pale blue walls, a quilt with butterfly patterns, a shelf of books and toys. Lily stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable, as if trying to reconcile this space with the bunker's stark walls. "It's yours," Emily said, her voice gentle. "You can change anything you want, but we kept it for you, just in case." Lily stepped inside, running her fingers over the quilt. "It feels familiar," she said, her voice hesitant. "Like I've been here before." Daniel's heart swelled, but he kept his distance, letting her explore. "Take your time," he said. "We're here when you're ready." The days that followed were a delicate dance. Lily was quiet, often retreating to her room to draw or read, but she began to join them for meals, her questions growing bolder. "Did I have friends?" she asked over breakfast one morning. "Did I like to sing?" Daniel and Emily answered, patiently, sharing memories of her play dates, her love for music, the way she'd belt out nursery rhymes in the bathtub. Each story was a thread, weaving her back into their lives. Therapy sessions with Dr. Ellis helped. Lily began to open up about the bunker, its dim lights, the hum of the generator, the books Thomas had given her, mostly survival manuals and old novels. He'd taught her math and reading, but also how to load a gun, how to move silently, how to ration food for the bad times. The lies he'd spun, of a world ravaged by fire and conflict, had been her reality, a prison of fear that kept her compliant. Dr. Ellis worked to unravel those lies, helping Lily process the truth while rebuilding her sense of safety. Thomas's case moved forward, his silence in custody broken only by a single statement to his lawyer. "I was protecting her." The journals, found in the bunker, painted a chilling picture of his mental state. After losing his wife and son, he'd become obsessed with the idea of a coming apocalypse, convinced the world was too dangerous for a child. Lily, with her bright smile and trusting nature, had become his fixation, a chance to recreate the family he'd lost. He'd built the bunker into a fortress, stocking it with enough supplies for a decade, and crafted a narrative to keep Lily hidden. The German Shepherd, purchased days before his arrest, was meant to deter her from exploring the trapdoor as she grew more curious. The community's response was a mix of shock and guilt. How had they missed this? Thomas had been a quiet neighbor, a man who kept his lawn mowed and his taxes paid, but no one had looked closer. The church organized support groups for the Harpers, and the school where Daniel taught offered resources for Lily's eventual return. Neighbors stopped by with meals, their faces etched with apologies, as if they could have seen through Thomas's facade. One evening, a week after Lily's return, Daniel found her in the living room, flipping through a photo album. She paused. On a picture of herself at 4, sitting on Emily's lap in a pumpkin patch, her face smeared with chocolate. "Was I happy?" she asked, her voice soft. Daniel sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. "You were the happiest kid I knew," he said. "You loved pumpkins, snow, everything. You'd laugh so hard you'd fall over." Lily's lips twitched, almost a smile. "I think I remember that," she said. "Not the pumpkins, but laughing. It feels warm." Emily joined them, carrying mugs of hot cocoa. "You used to beg for this every winter," she said, handing Lily a mug, "with extra marshmallows." Lily took a sip, her eyes widening slightly. "It's good," she said, and for the first time, there was a spark of something familiar. In her expression, a hint of the girl she'd been. The weeks turned into months, each day a small victory. Lily began school, a modified schedule with support from a counselor. She made tentative friends, drawn to her quiet strength, and started singing again, her voice soft but growing stronger. The nightmares came, dreams of the bunker, of Thomas's, lies, but Emily and Daniel were there, holding her hand through the dark. Thomas's trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. He was sentenced to life without parole, his journals read aloud in court, a testament to his delusion. The Harpers attended, needing closure, but left before the verdict, unwilling to let his shadow linger over their new beginning. Spring arrived in Willow Creek, the snow melting into rivers that fed the valley. The pines shed their winter weight, and the town bloomed with new life. In the Harpers' backyard, Lily planted a small garden, her hands in the soil, a quiet act of reclaiming the world she'd been denied. Daniel and Emily watched from the porch, their hearts full but scarred, knowing the journey wasn't over but grateful for every step. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, Lily joined them outside, a sketchbook in her arms. "I drew this," she said, showing them a picture of their house, surrounded by pines, a girl with light brown hair standing in the yard smiling. "It's home," she said simply. Daniel pulled her close, and Emily wrapped her arms around them both. The world wasn't perfect, and the years lost would always ache, but they were together, their family whole against all odds. In the quiet of Willow Creek, under a sky streaked with pink and gold, they began to heal, one day at a time.